So my name is Onose. I am a singer-songwriter based in East London, in Dagenham. Born in Nigeria, grew up in London. My style of music or genre of music, I've coined it alternative gospel and pop soul. Basically, the song was inspired by heartbreak. And I would say it was probably my first proper experience of heartbreak. The weeks leading up to the song, I just remember thinking, why do people do this? Because I think it was so bad. I went to a therapy session to speak to a therapist about it and told him everything I was feeling. He goes, "Oh, this is very normal." I was like, "Huh? You're telling me everyone goes through this?" He was like, "Yeah." And I said, "Why would they willingly choose to do that?" So I think it was me really coming to terms with the fact that I'm very emotionally charged, and kind of dealing with that was really difficult. And then it was just on the day, just after trying so hard to process it and watching movies that I kind of was hoping would make me feel emotional and cry, and it still wasn't working. I just ended up, the lyrics just came out of nowhere. The song it's almost a question of how do you channel all those emotions? And that's kind of a running theme throughout the song. It kind of starts with a question and the chorus is a question as well. And it's almost searching for an answer, but still having a question at the end of the song. Yeah. So the first verse is, can somebody tell me how to filter these emotions out? Things were easier when we were young enough to cry out loud. The first words are literally what I was thinking is, can somebody tell me how to filter these emotions out? Because I didn't know how to deal with those emotions. And the next bit where it just kind of took me back to not just childhood, but watching kids growing up as well. Especially now, I'd say as a godfather, I watch my godson, he just wears all his emotions on his sleeve. If he's sad, he cries about it. If he's happy, he smiles about it. So that's kind of where that verse goes into, saying things were easier when we were young enough to cry out loud. I kind of think as we grow up, socially we're taught not to be so expressive because it's a bit, the situation doesn't really call for it. There's a lot of settings that make people feel awkward if you're that emotional. When we didn't have to think too hard about the way we felt. When it didn't feel like drawing blood just to express ourselves. So when it says, when it didn't feel like drawing blood just to express ourselves, feeling like actually getting out how you feel, expressing how you feel almost feels like literally drawing blood. It's not an easy process. And I think that's reflective of how a lot of songwriting is for me. It feels like going through a lot of emotional filtering of my emotions, which can feel very painful. But as time goes on, we teach ourselves to smile and keep it all in. I need to remember what it feels like to cry again. So again, I think the first verse is playing a lot on the comparison between being young and being old. So that pre-chorus is kind of talking about how as we grow up, we learn to shield those emotions and contain them. But leading into the chorus, my main question is, how do you process that? And during that time when I wrote the song, the main thing I really remembered was understanding that I needed to cry, but I physically couldn't do it. And it felt like a necessity, but an impossible task at the same time. So that's why it says I need to remember what it feels like to cry again. And then that kind of leads on to the title of the song in the chorus. What do you do when the tears won't come? When your heart refuses to break? What happens when the tears won't come? But you know this is all you can take. When you know it's better out than in, but you're not strong enough to let it out. What happens when the tears won't come? When the river refuses to run? So that chorus is essentially the mantra of the song. What do you do when those feelings aren't being processed? And And I remember I performed this song to one of my sister's friends, and his reaction was just like, you have to put this out, because he said he could completely identify with those lyrics as well. And I think, if I'm not overreaching, I think a lot of men can relate to that, just having a lot of emotions. And I think a lot of people assume men don't have those emotions, or they're just capable of dealing with it better. But I think it's a case of not necessarily knowing how to deal with it. And I think the chorus probably came from an emotional awareness that it would be healthy to be able to process those emotions in the right way. In the moments where we need to be emotional, you understand how much of a strength that is. So that's kind of where the chorus just comes in, is, can someone teach me how to process that and what to do when your emotions almost aren't meshing the way they're supposed to? So the second verse is almost a journey to try and understand why I was feeling that way. So it goes, it isn't easy to admit that there is something wrong, so we trick ourselves into believing the emotion's gone. That verse is basically starting a journey of talking about how we end up suppressing our emotions. So it's just understanding that sometimes being aware of the things you're struggling with is painful. So it might be easier to just pretend like everything's okay. And I kind of think that's what leads to that feeling of emotional constipation that I described, is because you get into a pattern of just maybe just brushing it off, or not thinking about it, or just being strong. And then eventually, when it becomes too much, you don't know what avenue to kind of process it in the right way. But emotions aren't the kind of things that you can just ignore, 'cause they'll let you win the battle just so they can win the war. You think you're winning when you're pushing those emotions aside, but all you're doing is winning a battle. The war, which is being essentially a fully functional human being who can feel all those range of emotions, you're losing that at the expense of shutting down those moments of vulnerability and sadness. But as time goes on, we lose ourselves as we try to keep it all in. I need to remember what it feels like to cry again. It's putting the nail on the head on the process of what happens when you shut those emotions down. It's not just about teaching yourself to shut your emotions down. It's actually, you lose a part of yourself in the process as well. It's almost at the expense of being your full authentic self. So yeah.